No one expected this. Not in America. Not from Boeing. But in the quiet corridors of Everett, Washington, and on the factory floors of South Carolina, the machines have gone silent. A name once synonymous with American greatness, Boeing, is now preparing to leave the very land that made it iconic. And as production quietly shifts across the southern border, to the factories of Monterrey, Mexico, the implications stretch far beyond economics. This is no longer just about a company optimizing costs. This is about the erosion of something deeper, America's industrial soul. Once, when you heard the humming of Boeing's production lines, it was said to be the heartbeat of America. But in early 2025, that heartbeat stopped. Not with an announcement, not with a press release, but with leaked internal documents and a sudden pivot of global economic attention to Mexico. Boeing, the titan of aviation, a manufacturer trusted to build the aircraft that carry U.S. presidents and bring soldiers home from war, is quietly dismantling its own legacy on American soil. Why? The reasons are cold and calculated. Labor in Mexico costs a fraction, just 1/6 of U.S. wages. Taxes are friendlier. Logistics are cheaper. In total, Boeing could save $500 million a year. And when asked to justify the move, Boeing's CEO didn't hide behind ambiguity. He said globalization is no longer a choice, it's a matter of survival. But what does it say about a nation when its proudest symbols begin to pack their bags? This isn't just another company offshoring jobs. This is Boeing, the maker of Air Force One, the builder of the B-17 Flying Fortress, the firm that powered the U.S. into the jet age and the space race. To see those wings now being built elsewhere is to confront a deep and uncomfortable question. Is the "Made in America" promise dead? Trump certainly doesn't think so, or didn't. In 2017, standing triumphantly beside a gleaming Boeing aircraft, he promised to bring jobs back, to resurrect American manufacturing. But nearly a decade later, as the same factories go dark, the rhetoric sounds hollow. What happened to that promise? It's not just about Boeing, of course. It's about the entire structure that once propped up the American dream. Steel towns that echoed with the sound of molten furnaces now lie quiet. Textile mills, car plants, machine shops, they've all vanished or moved. And now, aviation, the last great industry, is faltering too. Why? The policies meant to protect it may be doing more harm than good. Trump's tariffs on aluminum and steel were designed to boost domestic production, but they've only made it more expensive for companies like Boeing to build at home. Smaller suppliers are collapsing. Raw materials are unaffordable. The costs have ballooned, and Boeing, like many others, is choosing survival over sentiment. Meanwhile, north of the border, Canada is playing a smarter game. Without boasting, without confrontation, they're quietly building an alternative. They're signing long-term agreements, investing in technology, strengthening education, and offering stability to global partners. While the U.S. throws up trade barriers, Canada rolls out the red carpet. And companies are noticing. So, as Boeing pulls back from Seattle and South Carolina, production lines start to hum in Monterrey and Toronto. Engineers trained in Wichita are applying for jobs in Montreal. American talent is bleeding across borders, and nobody seems able, or willing, to stop it. Some say it's just business. But symbols matter. Boeing wasn't just a manufacturer, it was a flag in the sky. And when that flag starts to fade, the question is no longer about aircraft. It's about identity. This is only the beginning. The silence from the administration grew louder with each passing day. Trump, known for his volatility and theatrical promises, was expected to respond with fire. And he did. On social media, he railed against Boeing's leadership, calling it un-American, a betrayal of the working class, a disgrace to the memory of American innovation. But the anger, though loud, came too late. Decisions had already been made. Machines were already being packed. Executives were already flying to Monterey. In private meetings, advisors warned Trump that any attempt to force Boeing to reverse course could backfire. The government had few tools left to wield, and none that wouldn't damage the broader economy. Sanctions? That would send shockwaves through Wall Street. Subsidies? Too late and politically toxic. Legislation? Congress was gridlocked, and both parties knew this moment had been building for years. The real story, however, wasn't unfolding in Washington or on cable news. It was unfolding in the quiet homes of laid-off engineers in Everett. In the shuttered diners outside Charleston, where workers used to eat after second shift. In the look of disbelief on the faces of welders, designers, logistics crews who had given decades of their lives to Boeing, only to find themselves replaced by cheaper contracts and warmer climates. What made it worse was the speed. There had been no warning. No slow fade. No 5-year relocation plan. Just a sudden, ruthless pivot, leaving thousands without clarity, without recourse. The message was clear. American loyalty had an expiration date, and that date had passed. This was not just a Boeing story anymore. It became a cautionary tale. Other manufacturers began reviewing their options. If Boeing, with its deep ties to defense contracts, to presidential fleets, to national infrastructure, could walk away, then anyone could. CEOs watched closely. Boards took notes. And quietly, plans began to shift across industries. Aerospace may have been the first domino. But it wouldn't be the last. Even the military felt the tremors. Parts of the F/A-18 and P-8 Poseidon programs relied on facilities in the Pacific Northwest. With production lines shuttered, procurement schedules were thrown into chaos. Defense analysts raised alarms. What if foreign conflict broke out and America couldn't source components fast enough? Across the Atlantic, allies asked hard questions. If Boeing wasn't stable in the US, what did that say about American reliability more broadly? Should NATO logistics depend on a country whose own supply chains were buckling under political pressure? Meanwhile, in Mexico, government officials celebrated. New contracts brought not only jobs, but influence. Trade schools expanded their aerospace programs. Infrastructure boomed. Industrial parks flourished. Monterey, once a secondary city, was quickly becoming a global aviation hub. And Trump's rage, however real, was no longer enough to stop it. His anger had become background noise, familiar, performative, ineffective. The people who once believed he would resurrect American industry were beginning to understand something harsher. Rhetoric doesn't build airplanes. Policy does. Infrastructure does. Education does. And those things had been neglected for too long. This wasn't an accident. It was the result of decades of short-term thinking. Of trade deals signed without foresight. Of promises made for cameras but never fulfilled. And now, the bill was coming due. Boeing's departure isn't just a news story. It's a milestone. A marker in America's industrial decline. And still, few in power seemed willing to admit it. This is only the beginning. Beyond the headlines and anger, the shockwaves began to reverberate across the global economic map. In Asia, South Korea and Singapore quietly opened dialogues with Boeing's leadership, offering incentives, tax relief, and streamlined infrastructure to lure high-tech production to their shores. In Europe, aerospace investors began withdrawing from joint ventures in the US, citing long-term instability and policy inconsistency, Canada, meanwhile, saw an opportunity and moved quickly. Already well-positioned with a growing aerospace sector in Quebec and Ontario, the Canadian government expanded subsidies and offered guaranteed supply chain partnerships. Skilled American engineers, now displaced and disillusioned, began submitting resumes north of the border. It was a quiet migration, not of laborers but of minds, experience, and expertise. The very core of America's industrial legacy was now leaking away, one contract, one visa, one plane at a time. Back home, Wall Street reacted with a mix of confusion and anxiety. Boeing stock fluctuated wildly. Investment banks lowered forecasts. Pension funds, heavily tied to industrial giants, issued vague but ominous bulletins to their clients. A whisper started to grow in financial circles. If Boeing was no longer safe, who was? And underneath all the numbers and press releases, something far more fundamental was unraveling: trust. Trust in American leadership. Trust in continuity. Trust that an engineer who dedicated 30 years to a company wouldn't be replaced overnight by a cheaper alternative across the border. Trust that, made in America, still meant something. That trust, once lost, is not easily restored. Trump's base, once unwavering, began to fracture. Manufacturing towns that had rallied behind his message of industrial revival now felt abandoned. The slogans that once stirred hope now sounded like echoes from a different time. A time before the machinery stopped, before the future was outsourced. Some blamed globalization. Others blamed corporate greed. But more and more Americans began to quietly ask, what if this wasn't just about Boeing? What if this was a symptom of a deeper rot, one that couldn't be fixed with speeches or tariffs? In town halls across the Midwest, at union meetings and local chambers of commerce, the same question surfaced again and again. What's next? Because if Boeing, the flagship, the pride, could abandon ship, then what company wouldn't? What industry was truly secure? How many more factories would go dark before Washington admitted the truth? And that truth is sobering. America is no longer the center of gravity for global production. Its status as the world's manufacturing powerhouse has slipped, not because of foreign theft or betrayal, but because of years of neglect, complacency, and political theater. The world moved forward while America stayed stuck in its own mythology. And Boeing's move is just a symbol, a highly visible crack in a much larger structure already under strain. Other cracks are forming. In pharmaceuticals. In semiconductors. In steel. In food processing. This is not the story of one company leaving. It's the slow unraveling of an empire's industrial heart. And for all the outrage, the speeches, the promises, the reality remains. Production is gone, jobs are gone, and the future is being written elsewhere. This is only the beginning.